A young man in Japan, he marries a girl from a farmer's family in the late 1970s, and his wife comes from a family that grows apples. Okay. Apples cultivation, it requires a lot of pesticides and chemicals. This was the practice, and this is the practice all over the world even today. And in the 1970s of Japan, apple cultivation was a very lucrative business. And his father-in-law, he owned a few orchards. So this man, I call him Kimura, his full name is Akinori Kimura. He inherits 3 to 4 apple orchards from his wife's side. Okay, he's a happy farmer, a happy son-in-law. He joins the farming activity, and he happily assists the big family growing apples. Apple cultivation, it requires a lot of pesticides. In a year, about 12 times people have to apply pesticides to keep the pests away from apples. Only then they get a good harvest. This was the prevailing practice in Japan in the 1970s. And this man, he also follows the footsteps of the elders, and he starts doing this. And soon his wife falls ill, not ordinary illness, but recurring illness. And he finds out that whenever the pesticide spraying happens in the field, shortly afterwards his wife becomes ill. So he finds a link between the application of the pesticides in the farm and her illness. Her illness was caused by the pesticides hanging around in the air, the very air she breathes. And she falls sick, not ordinary sickness, but she is bedridden for weeks and months together, whenever she becomes ill. And that is quite often because the spraying happens 12 times in a year. So he wants to do something about that because he's not able to witness the agony of his beloved wife. So he thinks that, he could grow apples without using any pesticides. But the farming community, all his neighbors and all the relatives, they ridicule him, telling him that it is not possible to grow apples without the application of chemicals at all, because apples need them year round. But he is steadfast because he is not able to withstand the agony of his wife's sickness. So he decides initially to cut down the number of times the pesticides are applied in his farm. So he begins with one farm. He reduces the pesticide application by half in the first year, that is from 12 times in a year to 6 times in a year. In the second year, he reduces it to 3, and in the third year, he reduces it to 1, and in the fourth year, he stops applying any pesticide in that farm at all. The results were there. Apples were still growing. The attacks by the pests, they actually come down. But the size of the apples, they start reducing. They are no longer the big apples, which we love to buy from a shop, but they are like small golf balls. Really small in size. This is a bigger problem because, apples, they are sold by weight, and the smaller ones, they weigh less. So he gets lesser profit, and so on and so forth. Right? Then his neighbors, again, they present apply pesticide because they tell him that that's the only way to get back to profit. But he flat refuses, because in the 4 years when he reduced and completely stopped applying pesticides, he sees a drastic improvement in the health of his wife. So emboldened by that understanding and the realization, he actually sets out to study natural farming, what it means to grow food without using any kind of chemicals and pesticides. And he happens to read a book by another Japanese natural farmer, Masanobu Fukuoka, who is hailed as the father of natural farming. My dear listeners of Radio Udaan, this is your RJ Babuji Janak Rajan, and you're listening to the latest episode of the Great Indian Monologue. And I have actually dedicated an entire episode to cover the life and works of Mr. Masanobu Fukuoka, so I'm not going to repeat it here. I will limit my show this week only with Akinori Kimura. Okay, Kimura picks up a book written by Masanobu Fukuoka. It's called Natural Farming. And he thinks he has got the holy grail about natural farming, because the book is like a hands-on manual kind of, how to do natural farming and what kind of things to take care of and what not to do and so on and so forth. So he happily goes back and he decides to convert all of his orchards into natural orchards. No chemicals at all, right? But what happened is, in all those orchards under his management, apple trees bloomed much later than the neighbors' orchards. Usually apple trees bloom in spring in Japan, but in his orchards, they bloomed only in September. That is about 6 months down the line, out of season, out of sync with the market. He had no clue why it was happening like that, and he keeps trying so many things, applying all kind of, natural herbicides and natural pesticides, like some soy sauce and whatnot. He tries out anything and everything, but no improvement at all. And for many months, the apple trees didn't bear any fruits. No appearance of any buds, any fruits at all. Just flowers and that's it. And he keeps trying all kind of options, he could without bringing in any chemicals, while the pressure is mounting from the family side, relative side and friend circle and the villagers, asking him to revert to chemical-based apple cultivation. He refuses it flat because he's convinced that if he does that, his wife's illness will reoccur again, right? So he had a valid reason and he believed that he could do something to still succeed. But success was elusive. Year 1, no apples. Year 2, no apples. Year 3, no apples. Year 4, no apples. But each year he had to cultivate, he had to maintain the farm. So without profit, without making any money, he starts borrowing money and he gets into debt deeper and deeper. And what happened is, the neighboring farmers, they started complaining that ever since he stopped applying pesticides, a lot of pests and insects have come into his farm and they invade the neighboring farms, thereby upsetting their apple harvest also, their apple growth also, right? So he doesn't know what to do, and he sees that the apple trees in his farms, in his orchards, they slowly start withering. On the deathbed, they're slowly decaying. He's not able to bear the sight. So one day, he waits for the evening time when all the neighboring farmers finish their work and they go back to their homes. Then he starts walking around his orchards and he starts talking to each and every tree in his orchard, pleading with the tree literally to hang on. I'm sorry I have not cracked it yet. I know you are really, suffering. I'm able to see your pain, but please stay with me. I will do something and you will live happily from here on. So he keeps talking to almost all the trees in his orchards. And he goes back, but nothing happens. And slowly frustration builds up. And he is forced by his family, to take up any kind of job to make some income so the debt could be reduced. So he becomes truck driver for long distance trucks, which keeps him on the road for days and days together. Like, in one shift, he would have to drive trucks for 4 to 5 days non-stop. And then he would come home for a break. And then again, he would leave shortly for another long haul drive. And this drives him crazy and he starts losing hope. Hope is the biggest thing any man can have, the biggest asset. And he starts losing hope little by little as the days pass by because he doesn't see any kind of life springing up in his orchards. One fine day, he decides enough is enough. I'm not able to bear this torture. I'm not able to bear this burden anymore. I don't want to be a burden to my family. And I cannot go back to chemical farming because I know it would surely kill my wife. So it is better I die. So he makes up his mind to kill himself. He gets a rope and without telling anybody, during a full moon day, he leaves his home in the dead of the night and he climbs the nearby hillock. Full moon, shining, gentle breeze, lot of trees and insects, chirping. Beautiful scenario, but this guy is about to kill himself because he doesn't see any hope in living. So he keeps climbing up and he sees a beautiful, beautiful tree which is really strong. So he thinks, this would be the ideal tree. So he throws the rope up. While throwing the rope up, something catches his attention. He is awestruck because the tree in which he threw the rope, he sees some beautiful fruits, shiny, healthy fruits hanging down. He mistakes them as apples initially, but later he clarified that, it was actually a walnut tree, and the fruits of walnut, they look almost similar to apple fruits. What he saw just before his eyes, it struck a chord, somewhere deep within him, and he starts wondering. You see, this is a hill. Nobody visits here. There is no farm keeper. There is no application of any pesticide, any herbicide, any fertilizer whatsoever. But this tree is in the prime of its health. It is brimming with health. The fruits are so shiny and the tree is full of fruits. How is it possible? He had his epiphany, that aha moment at that point in time, and he, abandons his act of killing himself because he thinks he has got a new lease of life through the tree. And his reasoning is, if this is possible in an untended forest, why is it not possible in a carefully tended orchard? He keeps thinking about it, and while climbing down the hill, something more strikes him. In a sense, he remembers that the soil underneath that walnut tree was completely run over by weeds. The plants humans normally think is invasive and we don't need them. So we apply weedicide and we eliminate them from our farms, right? But in this particular place where he sees this beautiful tree with a lot of fruits, that place is completely covered with a lot of grass and many other plants. Then he realizes that all along he had been focusing on what was happening above the soil in his orchards, but actually the problem may be with the soil. If the soil is healthy, then anything that springs from the soil will also be healthy. This is the biggest realization, his epiphany moment, and he carries it home. He doesn't tell anybody, and he starts paying attention to the soil, and he realizes that the soil in his orchards, they lack nitrogen, the essential building block of growth for any kind of life in the soil, whether it is plant, whether it is earthworm or whatever, they all need this nitrogen, right? And he reads a lot more to see how we can bring nitrogen to the soil, and he identifies a few pulses and nuts like groundnuts and chickpeas. The roots of these plants, they absorb nitrogen from the air, and they make it available to the roots of the trees subsoil, beneath the soil. So slowly he starts adding all these plants into the soil, and he stops cutting down any kind of weeds because he has this image of that tree in the forest, in the hill, which is completely surrounded by weeds, and still the tree stands healthy. So he tries to replicate that kind of an ambience in his farm. So soon what happens is, the wild undergrowth of his orchard, it starts attracting many kind of insects, bees, butterflies and whatnot. And soon earthworms appear, and then the predatory species, they eat on insects, they come in, and then the predator comes in, and very soon his orchards become kind of a minimal animal kingdom. And what happens is, I actually told you a few minutes back that before he decided to take his life, he walked around his orchard and he talked to almost all the trees, begging them to keep living, right? Almost all the trees he talked to one-to-one, soul to soul, they all survived. This is the biggest miracle that he has witnessed in his life. And every single tree he didn't talk to, most of them were on the boundary because he was too shy to talk to them while the neighboring farmers were still around. He thought he would be considered mad, if they saw him talking to trees. So he avoided the trees on the boundaries, and he talked to every other tree in the farm, and every single tree in the boundary died. And every other tree he talked, they survived and they started thriving. Right? Soon his farm, his orchard, not one but all the 4 orchards, they were brimming with flowers and then apples and bumper harvests year after year after year. And the neighbors, who saw this, they were envy of his success. So they decided to do something about it. So they actually complained to him that, because he still doesn't apply any kind of chemicals in his orchards, a lot of bugs, a lot of insects, they have taken his orchard as their homes, and they are invading the neighboring farms every single evening. And he refuses that, telling them that it would never happen because all those insects and bugs, they have enough food in his own orchard, so why should they go out? But it becomes a tussle. Then he and the neighboring farmer, they agree to observe what happens in a particular evening towards the sunset time. So after they finish the day's work, they all assemble at the border or the boundary of his orchard, one of his orchards. And what happens is, in the evening, a lot of insects from the neighbor's farm, they come into his orchard because there is no food in the neighbor's farms, in the neighbor's orchards, because they keep spraying pesticides and herbicides and whatnot. So no undergrowth, no life, and it's dangerous chemical zone for all those insects. So the surviving ones, they escape from their farms, their orchards into Kimura's orchard. So dumbfounded by the evidence, all those quarreling neighbors, they go back and they never make any trouble to Akinori Kimura anymore. And Mr. Kimura, armed with the knowledge about natural farming, and he revolutionizes apple cultivation in Japan, because up until then, it was a known or a conventional wisdom that apples could never be grown without application of any pesticides. And he broke that myth and he proved them wrong. And he is still cultivating fantastic apples. If you slice an apple and keep it open for a few minutes, it becomes rusty, kind of. The outer skin of the apple, it turns brown because of oxidation. But the apples from his farm are so good, they don't do this. You can cut it and keep it open for days together, right? So slowly the news spreads about his orchards, and he starts taking orders from people, who want to taste the apples from his farm. He has a typewriter, and he receives order through phone, and then he types the addresses of the receivers and he starts sending them through delivery. Courier delivery, kind of, post or whatever it is. And slowly the news spreads about the miracle apples from his orchard, and he becomes a national celebrity and then an international celebrity. And in 2013, a film was made about his life, which was titled Miracle Apples, which was incidentally the title of the book he wrote, where he shared his life's experience about his tryst with, so many negative results, and his decision, and then how the decision changed with the realization shown to him by nature, and what kind of success he reached afterwards. Akinori Kimura is a living legend. He still lives in Japan and he still cultivates his apples, and it's known worldwide. And he revolutionized the cultivation of apple just because of 3 things. Point number 1, he wanted to help his wife for a humane reason, that he didn't want her to suffer because of pesticides. Point number 2, he had this epiphany, when he was at the lowest point in his life. Nature showed him a way to live, to survive, and to thrive. And point number 3, he stuck to his belief, unwavering ever after. Once he decided no more chemicals in my farm, come what may, he went down a very steep trough, but he still came out successfully because of his belief in nature. And I don't know whether you heard this before. It was actually a quote from Benjamin Franklin, one of the greatest innovators and statesmen the world has ever seen. And I'm rephrasing his quote loosely that, whatever may be your dream, whatever may be your aspiration, the moment you decide to put your dream into action, the moment you start doing something to realize your action, lot of unknown things to you, they start working to fulfill your dreams, and even heavens bend down to help those people who have started pursuing their dreams. So my dear friends, my dear listeners of Radio Udaan, keep on dreaming and stick to your faith, come what may. You may surely face ups and downs, but your faith will take you through all of them and you will become a success story of your life. This is RJ Babuji Janak Rajan. You just listened to yet another episode of the Great Indian Monologue. I'll talk to you again in a week's time with another interesting story. Till then, I wish you all a fantastic week. Stay blessed, stay healthy. Bye-bye.